When Edmund and Marguerite Hollis walked into the Merrow Creek County auction with $340 between them, nobody thought they'd raise a hand. They were old. He was 74. She was 71. 2 weeks earlier, their own children had sold the house they'd lived in for 42 years, sold the furniture, sold her piano, split the money three ways and left them with a Buick, two suitcases, and a list of senior homes with an 18-month waiting list. So they drove east, not because anything was east, just because west was where their oldest son lived. They ended up in Merrow Creek because they ran out of gas, and that's how they found the house on Linden Street. A Victorian, 3 stories and a tower, empty for 60 years. The whole town called it haunted, and the starting bid was $12. $12. When Edmund raised his hand, the room went quiet. Not slowly, all at once. Every face turned, and every face wore the same thing: pity. But Edmund had spent his whole life as a structural engineer. He saw what nobody else in that room could see. And weeks later, behind a wall that should never have existed, what they found was something no one in Merrow Creek had ever imagined. The kitchen smelled like coffee and cardboard. Marguerite Hollis stood at the counter she had wiped down every morning for 42 years, and she watched her oldest son tape a sign to the window of her own house. For sale. He did it from the inside, pressed the tape flat with his thumb, didn't ask, didn't pause, just smoothed the corners like he was hanging a poster in a college dorm. "It's already done, Mom," Roland said. He didn't look up from his phone. "The buyer closes Friday." Friday. She held a coffee mug. Her hands didn't shake because she wouldn't let them. The mug said, "World's Best Grandma." Her granddaughter Brooke had given it to her when the girl was 6. Brooke was 20 now, hadn't called since 2 Christmases ago. "Your father's upstairs," Marguerite said. "I'll talk to him." "He already knows." Roland finally looked up, and there it was. That face, the patient face, the face of a man explaining something simple to a woman he had decided was no longer capable of simple things. "Mom, the equity in this house is your retirement, yours and Dad's. Split 3 ways, it sets all of us up. You understand that, right?" She understood the part he didn't say. All of us. All. Not you and Dad. Not Mom and Dad get a place. All of us. 3 children dividing the bones of the house their parents were still living in. "The piano," she said. "What about it? It's mine. The buyer doesn't want it. The movers will deal with it." Deal with it. 31 years. That piano had sat in the front room for 31 years. She had taught on it. Soothed 2 of her 3 children to sleep with her own playing, drifting up through the floorboards pregnant and restless, when the only thing that calmed the baby was Chopin at midnight. She had pressed those keys 10,000 mornings, and the buyer didn't want it. Roland left an hour later. He hugged her at the door. A real hug, which was almost worse because it meant he didn't think he'd done anything wrong. He smelled like cologne in the inside of a new car. "It'll be good for you," he said. "Less to take care of." Then he was gone. Edmund came down the stairs slow. He was 74 and he moved like a man who knew exactly how much each joint would cost him. He had a screwdriver in his hand. He'd been up there tightening a cabinet hinge in a kitchen that wasn't going to be theirs in 4 days, because that was Edmund. He fixed things, even things he was about to lose. "He's gone," she said. "I heard the car." They stood in the kitchen together, 2 old people in a house full of taped-up windows. "Diane?" she asked. Edmund shook his head. Their daughter, 40 minutes away, 4 empty bedrooms in a house with a pool nobody swam in. She said the timing wasn't good. "And Curtis?" A longer pause. "Curtis changed his number." Marguerite set the mug down, carefully, both hands, like it might break even though it wouldn't, even though it was the cheap kind that survived everything, which was somehow the cruelest thing about it. "So that's it," she said. "That's it." They packed for 2 days, 42 years, and it came down to what would fit in 2 suitcases in the trunk of a Buick. She fit her life in by feel. The good scarf her mother had left her. The photo albums, 3 of them, the rest would have to be left behind, in choosing which children's faces to keep and which to abandon in a sealed house felt like a sin she didn't have a name for. Her sheet music, 40 years of it, Bach and Debussy in the practice books with her students' pencil marks still in the margins. She could not take the piano. She closed the lid one last time, ran her swollen fingers along the wood. Then she walked out and didn't look back because looking back was a thing for people who had a choice about leaving. The morning they left, Marguerite sat in the passenger seat of the Buick and counted the money in Edmund's wallet while he loaded the last bag. $340. That was the retirement. That was 42 years and 3 children and a piano and 1,000 Sunday dinners. $340 and a car that pulled slightly to the left. Edmund got in, buckled up, put his hands on the wheel and didn't start the engine. "Where do we go?" she asked. He looked out the windshield at the house. "East," he said. "Why east? Because west is Roland." He turned the key. North is Diane, south is Curtis. So east it was, toward nothing, toward the only direction that didn't have a child in it. They drove 3 hours through flat farmland and small dying towns that all looked like the same town photographed from a moving car. Silos, grain elevators, churches with their steeples leaning a degree off true, which Edmund noticed every single time because a structural engineer never stops being a structural engineer, even when his whole life has just collapsed. They stopped in Merrill Creek because the gas light came on, and it was the first station they'd seen in 20 miles. Merrill Creek had been something once. You could see the ghost of it. A main street with a hardware store and a diner and a post office and a church. Half the storefronts dark. A population sign that said 2,000 and probably hadn't been right in 30 years. Marguerite needed a restroom. The only place open at 3 in the afternoon was a diner called Verna's. A woman behind the counter looked up when the bell over the door rang. About 60, reading glasses on a chain, a coffee pot in each hand like she'd been born holding them. "Regular or decaf?" "Just the restroom," Edmund said. "If that's all right." "Sit down first. I'll bring you both a cup." She looked at them. Really looked. The way a woman who has spent 30 years behind a counter learns to read a face in one glance. "You two have been driving a while." Her name was Verna Pruitt. She'd owned the place for 3 decades. She didn't ask questions she didn't need the answers to. She brought them coffee and 2 slices of peach pie, and when Edmund reached for his wallet, she shook her head. "First-timers eat free." "Is that a real policy?" Edmund asked. "It is now." And that was how they found the town. Not by a map, not by a plan, by a gaslight and a woman who made up a kindness on the spot and dared them to argue with it. Marguerite saw the flyer on the way back from the restroom, taped to a corkboard by the door between a lost cat notice and a church bake sale. Merrill Creek County Tax Auction. Saturday, 10 a.m. 13 properties. She read it standing there. Most were empty lots. A few were houses described in the careful, hopeless language of the condemned, and at the very bottom of the list, 14 Linden Street, Victorian circa 1891, condemned, no utilities, structural assessment unknown, minimum bid $12. $12 for a house. She brought the flyer back to the table and slid it across to Edmund without a word. He put on his reading glasses. He read it twice. $12, he said. Verna appeared with the coffee pot. "That's the Voss place. Been empty since old Adeline died." "How long's that?" Edmund asked. 60 years, give or take." She topped off his cup. "Kids around here call it haunted." "Is it?" Marguerite asked. Verna shrugged. "Every old house makes noises after dark. People hear what they want to hear." Marguerite looked at Edmund. Edmund looked at the flyer, and neither of them said the thing they were both thinking, which was, "We don't have anywhere else to go." "It's probably terrible," Marguerite said. Probably. $12, Edmund. I know. She picked up her fork, took a bite of pie, set the fork down. Let's go look at it. The auction was the next morning. The county courthouse smelled like floor wax and burnt coffee. About 30 people sat on metal folding chairs facing a long table where a woman in a gray blazer read property descriptions off a clipboard in a voice with all the music sanded out of it. The lots went first. A man in overalls bought 3 of them for $15 each. A young couple bid on a half-acre near the creek and held hands while they did it, and Marguerite watched them and felt something she didn't have a name for. A landlord from 2 towns over picked up a pair of rentals. Then, 14 Linden Street. The woman read the description flat. Victorian residence, approximately 4,000 square feet, 3 stories plus a tower. Condemned by the county in 1991. No water, no electric, no gas. Roof status unknown. Foundation status unknown. Starting bid is $12. A man in the 3rd row turned around and grinned at the room. That's the haunted house. And the room laughed. Not cruelly, worse. Comfortably. The laugh of people who all knew the same joke and had known it their whole lives. A few shook their heads. Somebody muttered something and somebody else snorted. The auctioneer waited. She'd done this before. She knew how it ended. Do I have $12? Silence. She scanned the room with the bored eyes of a woman who already knew she was about to mark a property unsold for the 4th year running. She reached for her pen. Edmund raised his hand, and the room went quiet, not slowly, all at once, like a door had shut. 30 heads turned. The man who'd made the haunted house joke stopped grinning. Marguerite watched every face arrive at the same expression at the same moment. Pity. Look at them. The old couple. The old man with his hand up. They don't understand. They don't know what they're doing. Somebody should say something. $12, Edmund said. For the house. The auctioneer looked at him over her glasses. Sir, you understand this property is condemned. The county makes no guarantees about structural integrity, habitability, or safety. I understand. There are no utilities connected. You'd have to petition for reconnection. That requires a structural certification from a licensed engineer. And here Edmund Hollis paused. Just long enough. I'm a licensed structural engineer, he said. Retired. The auctioneer blinked. She looked at her clipboard. She looked back at him. The pity in the room curdled into something else. Confusion. And underneath the confusion in a few faces, the first faint flicker of doubt, the suspicion that maybe the joke wasn't on the old man after all. $12, she said to the gentleman in the back. Nobody challenged it. Nobody even thought to. Edmund walked to the table, signed 3 pages, and the woman handed him a single key on a plain metal ring. Good luck, she said. She didn't sound like she meant it, but she didn't sound like she was laughing either. They drove to the house with the windows down. Linden Street was lined with old elms planted. Edmund guessed the same year the houses went up. Most of the homes were small and well kept. Gardens, fences, a swing set here, a flag there. The ordinary architecture of ordinary lives still being lived. Except the last one. The Victorian sat at the dead end of the street, set apart from its nearest neighbor by an empty lot gone wild with goldenrod and thistle. 3 stories of wood frame bones. A tower on the southeast corner. A wraparound porch that sagged hard on the left where a support post had simply given up. The paint had peeled to bare wood in long curling strips. One tower window was broken and a bird had built a nest in the gap, which was somehow the saddest detail and the most hopeful one at the same time. Edmund parked at the curb, got out, stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets, and didn't move for a full minute. Edmund, Marguerite said from the car. He didn't answer. He walked up the front steps, testing each one with his weight before he trusted it. He put his hand flat against the nearest porch column, held it there, fingers spread wide. the way a doctor holds a wrist. Then he looked up at the roof line, down at the foundation stones showing through the gaps where the lattice had fallen away. "The bones are good," he said. "You can tell that from the porch. I can tell that from the porch." The key fought the lock. Rust. But the mechanism turned and the door swung inward, and the smell came first. Dust. Old wood. Something faintly sweet underneath, like dried flowers pressed in a book and forgotten. The foyer was dark. Edmund forced a shutter open, and sunlight fell across a hardwood floor buried under 60 years of gray. A staircase rose along the left wall. Solid oak, the banister carved and intact. Straight ahead, a parlor with a bay window. To the right, a dining room with a stone fireplace, and on the mantel, a row of little ceramic figures too dust-covered to name. Marguerite walked in slowly. She ran one finger along the staircase railing and left a clean dark line in the gray. "It's a real house," she said. "It's a real house." "No, I mean it's not a ruin. Someone lived here. Someone loved this." Edmund was already gone, tapping walls, listening for the hollow that meant rot, running his palm along the joints where the framing met the floor. He found the cellar stairs off the pantry and went down with a flashlight for 10 minutes while Marguerite stood in the parlor and turned in a slow circle. When he came back up, he was almost smiling. Oak framing throughout, stone foundation, no visible cracks. The porch needs rebuilding and the roof's got 3 soft spots near the chimney, but the core is sound. He wiped his hands on his pants. "Whoever built this built it to stand 200 years. And we got it for $12, she said. And we got it for $12. They slept that first night on the parlor floor in sleeping bags from the thrift store on Main Street. No electricity, no water. Edmund had bought a battery lantern and a case of bottled water from the hardware store that afternoon, and the owner, a quiet man everyone called Otis, had looked at the $12 deed and shaken his head slow, and then opened a store credit line without being asked. "Pay when you can," Otis said, "and come back when you need something. You will." The house made noises after dark. Creaks, pops, a low groan that rolled through the walls when the wind shifted outside. Marguerite lay on her sleeping bag with her eyes open and listened to a 60-year-old house breathing in the dark. "It's not ghosts," Edmund said beside her. "I know it's not ghosts, Edmund. Wood contracts when the temperature drops. The outer walls cool faster than the inside framing. You get differential stress across the joints. The house is just settling. It's just—" "I have been married to you for 51 years, she said. "I know how houses breathe." He smiled in the dark. She heard it more than saw it. And even now, even after everything, even on a hard floor in a haunted house they'd bought for the price of a sandwich, she could still do that to him. But she couldn't sleep. The floor was hard. Her hip ached. The house was a stranger, and a stranger's noises kept finding her. So sometime after midnight, she got up, took the lantern, and walked the first floor. Not looking for anything. Just moving through the rooms the way you walk a new neighborhood to learn its shape. Learning the corners, the doorways, the places where the floor dipped. She ended up in the back corner of the parlor, and the lantern light caught something she'd missed in the daytime. A piano bench. Oak. Simple. A hinged lid. No piano anywhere near it. Just the bench alone on the hardwood. And pressed into the floor around it 4 round dents where the legs of a piano had stood for years. Maybe decades. The ghost of an instrument that wasn't there anymore. Marguerite stood very still. Then she sat down on the bench. She lifted the lid. Empty. A layer of fine dust. And at the bottom, folded neat, a single square of yellowed cloth, the kind you'd use to cover keys against the dust. She closed the lid, folded her hands in her lap. She looked at them. Her knuckles were thick, swollen at every joint. She had taught piano for 30 years. She had been good. Not famous, never famous, but the kind of teacher who could take the music out of her own hands and put it into someone else's. Her students had won competitions. One of them had gone to a conservatory in another state, and played in a symphony now somewhere out west and didn't know her name anymore. And that was fine. That was how it was supposed to work. Then the arthritis came, slow at first, then fast. One morning she woke up and her fingers wouldn't close far enough to reach an octave. And that was the end of it. Not a dramatic end, a quiet one. She stopped teaching and nobody made a fuss, and the piano sat in the front room untouched until Roland sold it along with everything else. She hadn't cried when Roland sold the house. She hadn't cried when Curtis changed his number. She hadn't cried when Diane said the timing wasn't good. She cried now, quietly, in the dark, on a piano bench with no piano in a house full of dust and 60 years of silence with her ruined hands folded in her lap, like two birds that had forgotten how to fly. Edmund found her there at first light. He didn't say anything. He sat down beside her on the bench, and the two of them watched the morning come up through the bay window and fill the parlor with the first real sunlight that room had seen in 6 decades. Breakfast was crackers and bottled water. Then they went up. The second floor had 4 bedrooms and a bath, all of it rough. Wallpaper peeling in long ribbons. Ceiling stains where the roof had wept. Dust on everything. But Edmund checked the walls and the joists in every room, and the structure held. One bedroom still had a brass bed frame shoved in the corner. Another had a tall wardrobe with a cracked mirror in the door, and Marguerite caught her own reflection in it, split down the middle, and looked away. The third floor was smaller. The staircase narrowed as it climbed the way. Old houses pinched their servants into the eaves. At the top, a short hallway. 2 doors on the right. Both opened onto cramped rooms, servants' quarters empty now except for dust and the bones of old wallpaper. And at the end of the hallway, there was a wall. Marguerite reached it first, because Edmund had stopped to test a floorboard and she'd kept walking lantern up, and she came to the end of the hall where the hallway simply ended. A flat plastered wall papered over, ordinary as anything. Except. She raised her hand. She'd been about to knock to find a stud to see if it would hold a picture hook, because some part of her was already thinking about living here, about hanging her family's photographs on these walls. An ordinary thought. A woman planning a home. She rapped her knuckle against the plaster, and it answered wrong. Not the solid, dull thud of plaster on lath on framing. An echo. Thin. Hollow. A sound with empty air behind it. She froze. Edmund. He came up the hall. What is it? Knock on this wall. He did. He frowned. He knocked again, lower, then higher, mapping it with his ear the way he'd mapped the whole house. Then he crouched and ran his hand along the baseboard. This baseboard is pine, he said slowly. Everything else in this house is oak. He stood, looked closer at the wallpaper. The pattern almost matched the rest of the hall. Almost. The shade was a hair off. The floral repeat was maybe half an inch wrong. Someone built this wall after the house went up, he said. This isn't original. There's a room back there. He pressed his palm flat against the plaster and held it. And after a long moment, through inches of plaster and dead air, he felt it the faintest draft. Cool, stale, pushing back against his hand from the other side. There's a room back there, he agreed. They stood together in front of a wall that shouldn't exist. At the end of a hallway where no one had walked in longer than most people in Merrill Creek had been alive. Can you open it? She asked. Edmund looked at the seam where the false wall met the real frame. He looked at the pine baseboard that didn't belong. He looked at his wife, who was holding the lantern with both hands, now her swollen knuckles white around the handle, her face lit gold from below and full of something he hadn't seen on it in 5 years. It wasn't grief. It was curiosity. It was the look of a woman who had just remembered she was still alive enough to wonder about something. I can open it, he said. They didn't open it that day. Edmund needed a pry bar and a chisel he didn't have, and they needed to eat, and the crackers were gone. You're just going to leave it, she said. It's been there 60 years, Margie. It'll keep till after breakfast. But neither of them slept much that night either. And it wasn't the house breathing that kept Marguerite awake. It was the thought of a room sealed for 60 years, and a draft of cool, dead air pushing out through a wall. And the strange, certain, impossible feeling she would have laughed at anyone who said it out loud, that on the other side of that plaster something had been waiting a very long time, for someone to finally knock. Verna came in the morning before they could even start. 3 solid raps on the front door, which startled them both because nobody in town knew they'd actually moved in. Marguerite opened it to find Verna Pruitt standing on the porch with a wicker basket and a rain jacket over one arm, even though the sky was clean blue. "Saw your lights last night," Verna said. "First time in 60 years that house had a light on inside it." "Battery lanterns," Edmund said behind her. "Still counts." She pushed the basket into Marguerite's hands. 6 muffins, a thermos of coffee, 2 apples and a block of cheddar wrapped in wax paper. And when Marguerite started to protest, Verna held up one finger. "Don't. I made too many. Somebody's got to eat them before they go stale, and it's not going to be me." So they ate on the porch steps, the 3 of them in the cool, clean morning. And Marguerite asked the question that had kept her up half the night. "Tell us about this house." Verna poured herself a cup and settled onto the top step. Adeline Voss, she was a music teacher, piano mostly, gave lessons right here in that front parlor for years. She nodded at the bay window. "Lost her husband young, some kind of fever before I was born. Raised her girl by herself after that." "The girl," Marguerite said. "Hazel." Verna said the name like it still cost her something even secondhand. "That child was something. Everybody in this town knew it. She won a regional competition at 12, and after that, people drove in from 2 counties over just to hear her practice. My mother used to talk about it till the day she died. Said on summer evenings, when the windows were open, you could hear Hazel from clear out on the sidewalk. People would just stop, stand there, listen." "She was that good," Edmund said. "She was that good. Adeline had her all lined up for a conservatory. Everything was set." Verna looked down into her cup. "And then she got sick." The morning went still. A dog barked somewhere down the block and stopped. "Pneumonia," Verna said. "She was 19, 4 days start to finish. Adeline had a daughter on Monday and a grave by Friday." Marguerite looked up at the 3rd-floor windows. The glass was dark behind the grime. "Adeline never came back from it," Verna went on. "My mother said she sealed up the 3rd floor, nailed a door shut and plastered right over it. Couldn't stand to look at it. After that, she stopped teaching, stopped going to church, stopped answering the door, lived on the 1st floor by herself for years, ate alone, didn't speak to a soul unless she had to." "How did it end?" Marguerite asked, though part of her already knew. "Mail carrier noticed the letters piling up. Called the sheriff. She'd been gone about a week." Verna set her cup down. "No family left to claim her. No family at all. The county took the place for back taxes and tried to auction it 3-4 times over the years. You saw how that went. Too big, too far gone. Too many stories about noises in the night." She stood, brushed the muffin crumbs off her lap. "You really going to fix this place up?" "That's the plan," Edmund said. Verna looked at the porch railing, half its spindles missing, at the sagging boards under her own feet. "Then I'll be back tomorrow, and the day after." She walked down the steps, turned at the sidewalk. "The well still works, by the way. Adeline used it till the day she died. There's a hand pump around the side by the kitchen wall. You just have to prime it." And then she was gone up the street, and Edmund found the pump exactly where she'd said. And after 10 minutes of brown water and a lot of swearing, he didn't usually do it, ran clear. They had water. But Marguerite wasn't thinking about water. She was thinking about a girl named Hazel who'd practiced with the windows open, and a mother who couldn't bear to look at the room where it happened, and a wall at the end of a hallway with cool dead air pushing out from behind it. A boy showed up the next morning, 17 maybe, tall and thin, a ball cap pulled low, work boots that had seen real use. He stood at the end of the front walk with his hands jammed in his jacket pockets and watched Edmund measure the porch railing for 10 full minutes before he said one word. "You need help with that." Edmund looked up from his tape measure. "Depends. You know how to hold a level? I know which end goes up." "That's a start. Come here." His name was Jesse Albright. He lived 4 houses down with his grandmother, 78, and on oxygen. He dropped out the year before to take care of her. Worked odd jobs when he could find them. Mowing, gutters, hauling other people's trash. "What are you paying?" Jesse asked, climbing the steps. 15 an hour, and everything I know about structural engineering." "I don't need to know about structural engineering." "You might. Hold this board steady." Edmund taught the only way he ever had. By working. He didn't lecture, he showed. When Jesse got a measurement wrong, Edmund didn't correct it. He just said, "Check it again." And Jesse checked, off by a 1/4 inch. "So what do? Cut a new board or shim it?" A 1/4 inch isn't a new board, it's a shim. You waste lumber on a 1/4 inch, you'll run out of wood before you run out of house. Jesse nodded slow, because that was a kind of thinking he already understood. He'd been running a whole household on almost nothing for over a year. Waste was the enemy. A 1/4 inch was a shim. While they worked the porch, Marguerite walked to town. She had a purpose now. She just didn't want to say it out loud yet in case it sounded foolish. The library was in a brick building on Main Street that used to be a church. Inside it still smelled like old hymnals. The librarian was a young woman with wire-rimmed glasses who looked genuinely thrilled that a human being had walked in and wanted something. "Nobody ever asks for local history," she said, hauling cardboard boxes from the back. "We've got clippings going back to 1910. Marguerite found her in the second box, a yellowed clipping from the Merrill Creek Gazette. The headline read, "Local Girl 12 Wins Regional Piano Competition." Below it, a grainy photo printed on cheap newsprint. A young girl at a concert grand. Hands on the keys, chin lifted. A small, certain smile. Hazel Voss. Marguerite held it with both hands, and she saw it, the posture, the wrist level and relaxed, the hand position of a child who had been trained well and then gone somewhere past her training into the place where the music stopped being something you played and started being something you were. In the same box, she found 2 more. One was a photograph of the house in the 1940s. Fresh paint, flower boxes in every window. A woman in an apron on the porch, hair pinned up, smiling at the camera. Adeline Voss. Young. Alive. Standing on the very porch Edmund was rebuilding at that moment 4 blocks away. The other was an obituary. 1962. 2 inches of column. Adeline Voss, age 67. Resident since 1924. Piano teacher. Widow. Preceded in death by her daughter Hazel Ann Voss, 1958. And the last line, survived by no one. Marguerite sat in that quiet old church turned library for a long time, holding 3 words in her hands. Survived by no one. A whole family. A mother, a father, a girl who could make a town stop on the sidewalk. And in the end, 3 words in a county paper and a sealed room and a piano nobody had touched in 60 years. She put the clippings back, but she remembered every word. They opened the wall the next morning at first light. Edmund had the tools laid out in the 3rd-floor hallway before Marguerite even came up with the coffee. Hammer, pry bar, cold chisel, flashlight. Jesse arrived at 7 and stood at the end of the hall looking at the wall with the exact expression Edmund had worn 2 days before. "There's really a room back there." "There's really a room back there." "How do you know?" "Pine baseboard, wrong wallpaper, and I can feel air coming through." Edmund set the chisel against the plaster at the seam. Struck it. A chunk of white fell away, trailing a cloud of fine dust. He struck again and again. Each blow opened the wall a little more. Behind the plaster lath, thin wooden strips nailed horizontal. Behind the lath, a gap of maybe 4 inches. And behind that, caught in the flashlight beam through the broken plaster, a door. "There it is," Jessie whispered. Edmund cleared enough to expose the whole thing. Heavy oak darker than the rest of the woodwork. 6 panels, a brass knob gone nearly black, a brass keyhole below it. Marguerite stood behind them both hands wrapped around her coffee mug, not drinking. Edmund tried the knob. It turned. The door didn't move. Locked. He looked at the keyhole, then up at the door frame. He ran his fingers along the top of it where a thin ledge of molding made a narrow shelf. His fingers brushed something small and metal, heavy with dust. A key. He held it up. Brass, old, a simple notched blade. And Marguerite understood it before he said a word. Adeline had sealed this room. She plastered over the door and buried it behind a false wall. But she left the key right there, an inch above the frame, where anyone who ever opened the wall would find it, because she couldn't go in. But she couldn't lock it away forever either. She built a wall and left a key in the same breath. A woman saying, "I cannot bear this, and please someday somebody bear it for me," both at once. Edmund fitted the key. It resisted, then turned with a click that echoed down the empty hall. He pushed the door open, and a rush of stale, cool air came through. Dry, carrying a smell that was different from the rest of the house. Not dust and rot, but paper, varnish, dried flowers. The smell of a room that had been closed at a single moment in 1959 and never opened again. Edmund went first. Jessie and Marguerite followed. The room was bigger than they'd expected. It ran the full width of the house on the east side, with 2 tall windows looking down over the street, both intact. The glass streaked with 60 years of grime, but unbroken. The morning light came through in pale gold bars and fell across the floor. And in the center of the room, under a white cotton sheet gone yellow with age, a shape all 3 of them recognized at once. A grand piano. Along the walls, on every flat surface, on chairs on the floor, stacked on a low bookshelf under the windows, were piles of paper. Sheet music, handwritten, ink on staff paper, hundreds of pages. And against the far wall, a small walnut writing desk with a slanted top in a single drawer. On the desk, placed dead center square to the edges deliberate, a sealed envelope. Nobody spoke. The room didn't feel abandoned. It felt like a place that had been waiting. Patient. The way a station feels at midnight when the last train still hasn't come. "This was Hazel's room," Marguerite said quietly. Edmund picked up the envelope. On the front, in careful handwriting, faded to light brown, 4 words. "To whoever finds this." He looked at Marguerite. She nodded. He slid his thumb under the brittle flap and drew out 2 pages, and he read them aloud, standing in the gold light with the dust hanging in the air. "My name is Adeline Voss. I am writing this in February of 1959, 1 year after the death of my daughter, Hazel Ann Voss, who was 19. Hazel was a pianist. That is not enough to say. Hazel was the music itself. She heard things in the silence the rest of us could not. She played her first recital at 8. She won the regional competition at 12. By the time she was 16, a conservatory had accepted her on full scholarship to begin when she turned 18. In the autumn of 1955, when she was 16, Hazel was in an accident. A delivery wagon on the county road lost a wheel and struck her on the left side. Her left hand was badly hurt. The doctor said she would get most of the use back, but the fine control, the speed, the precision a concert pianist needs that would not fully return. Hazel did not stop. She did not complain. She sat down at this piano the day she came home from the hospital, her left hand bandaged and swollen, and she began to compose. What she wrote was unlike anything I had ever heard. She wrote music for hands that could not do what healthy hands do. Wider fingerings, chord voicing spread differently, simplified, yet still full and rich. Pieces a pianist with limited reach and limited strength could play without pain and without the music suffering for it. She said she was writing for every pianist who had ever been told they could not play anymore. She composed for 3 years, over 40 pieces, each one marked in her own hand with notes on the fingerings and the reasons behind every choice. Hazel died of pneumonia on the 14th of March, 1958. She was 19. It took 4 days. She was composing at this desk on a Monday. She was gone by Friday. I have sealed this room because I cannot bear to enter it, but I cannot destroy what she made. It is all I have left of her, and it is all she left of herself. In the drawer of this desk, you will find a bank book. I have placed $800 in a trust at the savings bank in town. It is everything I have. I have asked that it remain until someone finds this room. If the bank honors my wish, the money will have grown by then. It is for this house and for music. For music education for those who need it most. If you are reading this, someone has opened this room. I do not know who you are or how you found it, but I believe you were meant to. Please let the music live. Adeline Voss, February 1959. Edmund folded the letter. His jaw was tight. He set it back on the desk exactly where it had been. Jesse hadn't moved from the doorway. He was staring at the stacks of sheet music with a look Edmund couldn't read. And Marguerite was crying. No sound, just tears running down her face, while she stood by the piano with one hand resting on the yellowed sheet, and she didn't wipe them away. Margie, Edmund said. She took hold of the sheet with both hands, and she pulled it off in one slow motion, and it slid to the floor in a heap of faded cotton. A Steinway, a Model B, 7 feet of ebony case, the finish dulled by 60 years of still air, but the wood intact. No cracks, no warp. The room had been sealed tight enough that the temperature in the air had barely changed in 6 decades. It had kept the piano the way amber keeps an insect, whole, stopped, outside of time. Marguerite lifted the fallboard. The keys were yellowed ivory, the sharps a deep brown. She pressed middle C with one finger. The note came out, slightly flat, a little muffled, but it came out. The hammer still struck. The strings still sang. The soundboard still carried it up into the room. It needs tuning, she said, but it works. She sat down on the bench, a real bench this time, cushion matched to the piano. She settled herself the way she'd settled 10,000 times at her own piano. The one Roland sold to a second-hand shop for whatever they'd give him. And on the music stand above the keys, someone had left a composition open. The title was written across the top in Hazel's hand, For Hands That Remember. Marguerite read the first 8 bars. Her eyes moved across the staff. Her mouth opened slightly. Edmund, what is it? The fingerings. Look at the fingerings. He didn't read music, but he could see the pencil numbers above and below the notes. These aren't normal, Marguerite said. The intervals are wider. She's using the thumb and second finger where you'd normally use the fourth and fifth. The chords are voiced spread out. She looked up at him, and something was breaking open in her face. She wrote these for someone who can't reach, someone with no strength in the ring finger and the pinky, someone with hands like mine. She didn't say it out loud. She didn't have to. She placed her hands on the keys, her swollen knuckles, her stiff joints, the fingers that hadn't reached an octave in 5 years. And she played the first chord. It sounded full, open, rich, and her fingers reached every note. She played the second chord, then the third, then the first phrase. The melody rose up off the old piano, thin, a little out of tune, but clear, warm and simple on the surface, and then building, deepening, opening into something larger as it went. And Marguerite's hands followed it. Every note, because Hazel had put every note exactly where damaged hands could find it. She played the first page. Then she turned to the second and played that. Her eyes were wet, but her hands were steady, steadier than they'd been in years. The music filled the sealed room and spilled out the open door down the narrow stairs through the whole sleeping house. She didn't simplify it. She didn't fake it. She played it whole. Full, complex, beautiful music arranged so a pianist with arthritis or an injury or 71-year-old joints could play it without pain and without losing a single thing. When she finally stopped, the silence in the room was different from before. Before, it had been the silence of a place sealed shut. Now it was the silence of a place that had been opened. Edmund sat on the floor with his back against the wall. Jesse was on the top step just outside the door, his ball cap in his hands. "How many are there?" Marguerite asked, looking around at all the paper. Jesse stood. "Let me count." He moved through the room, careful sorting the pages into piles by their title sheets. It took him 20 minutes. 43, he said. 43 complete pieces. 31 for solo piano, 7 for piano and violin, 3 for piano and cello, 2 for a little ensemble. 43 pieces, Marguerite said, in 3 years. She was working fast, Edmund said. She knew she was running out of time. Marguerite looked at the open composition on the stand. Maybe not the pneumonia, but she knew her hand was getting worse, not better. She was writing as fast as she could. Edmund went to the desk and opened the drawer. A small leather book with a brass clasp. He opened it. Bank book, savings bank in town. Account opened February 1958. One deposit, $800. That was everything she had, Marguerite said. It's still there, Jesse said suddenly. They both looked at him. The savings bank, it's still on Main Street. My grandmother banks there. They looked at each other. A bank book, a letter. 43 pieces for hands that don't work right. A Steinway that survived 60 years in a sealed room. And a trust opened the same month a girl wrote her last song. Edmund put on his cleanest shirt the next morning and walked to the bank with the bank book in his jacket pocket. It was a small brick building with green shutters and a brass plaque by the door that said, "Established 1897. Inside 2 teller windows and a few wooden chairs. A young woman with a name tag that read Priya looked up when he came to the counter. "Can I help you?" "I'd like to ask about an account." He set the bank book on the counter. She opened it, read the number, typed it in, then she typed it again. She looked at her screen. She looked at Edmund. She looked back at the screen. "Sir, this account was opened in 1958. I know it's a trust. It's been compounding for 66 years. Yes, I can see that." She picked up the phone. "Mr. Dunmore, could you come out here a moment? There's something you should see." She set the phone down and looked at Edmund with an expression he'd seen before. It was the same look the auctioneer had given him, but not pity this time, closer to disbelief. "Our manager will be right out," she said. "You're going to want to sit down." The manager was a man in his 60s gray suit, reading glasses he kept pushing up his nose. His office was in the back. He shut the door and sat across from Edmund. "Mr. Hollis, my name's Harold Dunmore. I've run this bank 22 years, and I have never seen anything quite like this." "Like what?" He turned his screen around. "Adeline Voss opened this trust in February of 1958, $800 with explicit instructions. The account was to stay open and earning until someone presented the bank book and a letter. She even named the letter. 'To whoever finds this.' Those were her words, written into the trust terms. And the bank just left it. A trust with clear terms doesn't expire. It moved from savings to a certificate in 1971, into a conservative bond fund in 1989 when our holding company restructured. Every step followed her original terms. Safe, low risk, steady." He paused. "Slow and steady over 66 years. Edmund looked at the number on the screen. He looked at it for a long time. 118,000, Dunmore said. "And change." Edmund sat back. "Now," Dunmore folded his hands. "There is one complication I have to tell you about." "What complication?" "About 3 years ago, someone came in asking about this exact account." Dunmore took off his glasses. "Said he was a relative of the Voss family. Wanted to know the balance, wanted to know the terms. We couldn't release a thing. He had no bank book, no letter, no documentation. But he was persistent, came back twice. And the second time, he brought a man with him in a very expensive suit, said something about a development opportunity on Linden Street. Edmund went very still. Did you get his name? He left a card. Dunmore opened a drawer and slid it across the desk. I kept it. Something about the whole thing didn't sit right with me. Edmund picked up the card, and the floor seemed to tilt very slightly under his chair, because the name on the card was not a Voss. The name on the card was a development firm 200 miles away, and clipped to the back of it in Dunmore's careful hand was a note. The man who'd come asking, who'd claimed family ties to a dead woman with no family left. Edmund read it twice. He didn't recognize the name. It meant nothing to him. But he recognized something else, a phrase Dunmore had written underneath, the man's stated reason for the inquiry. Acting on behalf of a family member with a financial interest in the Linden Street property. A family member. Edmund put the card in his pocket. His hand was steady. His voice was steady. Everything about him was steady the way a beam is steady, right up until the load finds the crack you couldn't see. Mr. Dunmore, he said, if anyone comes asking about this account again, anyone at all, I need you to call me first. Of course. Edmund walked home with the bank book in one pocket and the card in the other. And he didn't go inside right away. He stood at the curb and looked up at the house, the fresh paint they'd started, the porch Jesse had helped him level, the third-floor windows where even now he could hear the faint sound of Marguerite playing a dead girl's music to an empty room. $118,000 for the house and for music, for those who need it most. Somebody had come sniffing around that money 3 years ago. Somebody claiming a family that didn't exist. Somebody who knew about Linden Street and a development opportunity before the Hollises had ever heard the name Marrow Creek. And Edmund stood on the sidewalk with a stranger's business card burning a hole in his pocket and thought with the cold clarity of a man reading a blueprint. Somebody wants this house. Somebody has wanted it for a while. And we just walked right into the middle of it. Edmund didn't tell Marguerite about the card right away because he didn't have a name that meant anything yet. Just a phrase, a family member with a financial interest, and a feeling in his gut that he'd learned over 50 years of reading load and stress and failure never to ignore. So he watched, and he waited, and he kept building. The work changed after the bank. It went from patching to rebuilding. Edmund drew plans on graph paper at the kitchen table, working from the structure he'd mapped in his head that first day in the cellar. New roof, full electrical, plumbing to all 3 floors, paint inside and out. He hired the work where he had to and did the rest himself with Jesse on the ladder, and Verna showing up at noon with sandwiches and opinions about paint nobody had asked for. Not that blue, she said, frowning at the test patch on the front siding. Adeline's house was white, dark green trim. I've seen the photograph. I have the photograph, Marguerite said. The library had it. White and dark green it was. An electrician from the next town came and rewired the first 2 floors, charged half his rate when Edmund told him why. My grandmother played, he said. Can't say no to a story about a piano. The plumber from the church ran new copper to the upstairs bath and wouldn't take a dime. Call it my contribution to the cause. And the cause had a name now, because Marguerite had started teaching. It began with a knock, a woman on the porch with a girl of about 11 standing behind her half hidden. Are you the piano teacher? Marguerite hadn't called herself that in 5 years. I used to be. My daughter wants to learn, Sarah. The woman hesitated. She's got a situation with her hand. The girl held it up. The 3rd and 4th fingers were stiff, scarred, old burns by the look of it. We drove to 2 teachers in the county, the woman said. Both of them said she'd never play properly. Then I heard about you and about the music you found up there. Marguerite looked at the girl, and the girl looked back with the flat, stubborn stare of a child who had been told no and had decided privately that no was not an answer she accepted. Come in, Marguerite said. She started Sarah on Hazel's beginning exercises that same afternoon. Within 20 minutes, the girl was playing a simple melody with both hands. Her scarred fingers found the adapted positions Hazel had built into the music 60 years before she was born, and the notes came out clean, whole. And Sarah smiled, for the first time since she'd walked through the door. 2 more students came that week, then 3 more. Marguerite taught in the parlor on a donated upright Verna's church had been storing for a decade. She kept the Steinway upstairs for advance work and for her own playing every evening when the students went home and the house went quiet. A farmer with arthritic hands, a retired school secretary whose doctor said fine motor work might slow the disease, a boy of 9 who'd never touched a piano in his life. They sat at the upright and played Hazel's simplest pieces, slow and careful, and the music came out of them. "She wrote for us," the farmer said one afternoon, staring at his own bent fingers on the keys. "This girl died before I was born. She wrote this music for exactly these hands." "She did," Margarita said. "That's exactly what she did." And one Tuesday afternoon, while Sarah was practicing in the parlor and Marguerite was rinsing cups in the kitchen, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. Marguerite saw it through the window. She knew the walk before she saw the face. Roland. He came up the path slow, looking at the house the whole way. The new paint, the level porch, the clean gutters and the repaired windows. His expression shifting with every step from confidence to confusion to something he was trying hard to keep off his face. A woman got out the passenger side. Blazer, leather portfolio, a stranger. Marguerite did not go out to meet them. She dried her hands, and she waited at the kitchen door. "Mom," Roland said, stepping into the foyer like he owned it. "Roland, the place looks different." "The place is different." Edmund came in from the side yard. He took one look at the woman with the portfolio and one look at the card in his memory, and something in his face went very quiet and very hard. "Who's your friend?" Edmund asked. "An associate. She works in historic property assessment." "Did she come to assess the property?" Roland put his hands in his pockets, and Marguerite knew that gesture. He'd done it at 16 when he wanted the car. He'd done it at 25 when he wanted the loan. He did it now. "Can we talk inside in private?" They sat at the kitchen table. The associate set her portfolio down and didn't open it. Marguerite stood. She would not sit with this. Sarah's scales drifted in from the parlor, soft and stubborn. "I heard about the house," Roland said. "About what you found up there. The piano, the music, the bank account." "How did you hear?" Edmund asked. "It was in the county paper. A friend forwarded it." "A friend," Marguerite said. Roland leaned forward, and the salesman came out of him smooth and practiced. "Look, there's an opportunity here. This house with the story with the historic designation it's going to qualify for is worth real money. The property alone is $200,000 on the low end, with the Voss story and the press more. I know a developer who'd make an offer this week. We sell, we split it, and we set you and Mom up somewhere comfortable. A real place. Heat, air conditioning, a bathroom that doesn't smell like copper." The refrigerator hummed. Outside, Jesse had stopped sanding. "I know a developer," Edmund repeated, slowly. "On Linden Street." "What nothing?" Edmund didn't take his eyes off his son. "Go on." "Dad, you're 74. You're doing manual labor on a roof. The electrical was done by a volunteer. The electrical was done by a licensed electrician. And I like the roof." Roland turned to his mother. "The old move. When Dad won't bend work, Mom." "Mom, talk to him." And Marguerite pulled out a chair. She sat down across from her son. She placed both hands flat on the table where he couldn't avoid them. The swollen knuckles. The same hands he'd watched give up the only work they were ever fully made for. "Roland," she said, "do you remember when I stopped teaching?" "Mom, 5 years ago. My hands. Do you remember what you said to me? On the phone, the week I lost the only thing that was ever fully mine." He didn't answer. You said, well, it's not like it was paying the bills anyway. The kitchen went still. And then you sold my piano. You told the movers to deal with it. They sold it for $75 to a shop on Route 9. I called them. They remembered. They said a man in a nice suit dropped it off and said his mother didn't need it anymore. I was managing a complicated situation. You sold my mother's wedding ring. The associate's pen stopped moving. You took it from my jewelry box the day before the house closed. You drove it to a pawn shop on Meridian Street and you sold it for $400. I know because I called every pawn shop within 50 miles until I found the one. Blue suit, nice car. He said it was his mother's ring and she wouldn't miss it. Roland's face had gone white. Not red, not angry. White. That ring was the only thing I had left of my mother, Marguerite said. And you sold it for $400 because you thought I wouldn't notice, or wouldn't care, or that it didn't matter because I was just your mother. And mothers don't get to keep things that matter. She folded her hands. This house is not for sale, Roland. Hazel's music is not for sale, and we are not going anywhere. Roland stood up. The associate stood with him. This is a mistake, he said, but there was no weight in it. You're welcome to think so, Marguerite said. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the knob, didn't turn around, and then he was gone, and the sedan pulled away from the curb and Sarah's scales kept right on going in the parlor because an 11-year-old with scarred hands had no idea anything had happened at all. Edmund waited until the car was out of sight. Then he took the business card out of his pocket and laid it on the kitchen table. Marguerite read it. The development firm. The note in Dunmore's hand. A family member with a financial interest in the Linden Street property. She looked up. That was 3 years ago, Edmund said. Somebody claiming to be Voss family, asking the bank about the trust, bringing a developer. Roland didn't know about this house 3 years ago. No, Edmund said. He didn't. And they sat with that because it didn't fit. Because somebody had wanted this house and this money 3 years before Roland ever saw a newspaper article. Somebody who'd lied about a dead family to do it. The answer came on a Thursday. A registered letter, heavy stock, a law firm in the city, and the words across the top that made Marguerite's stomach drop. Notice of claim, estate of Adeline Voss. A man named Gregory Hale was claiming descent from the Voss family, claiming the house, claiming the trust. A great-nephew, the letter said, through a cousin who'd left town in the 40s, with a lawyer and a development firm behind him and a court date. He can't, Marguerite said. The obituary, it said survived by no one. I read it. I held it in my hands. A newspaper isn't a court record, Edmund said grimly. So they went to the library. And the young librarian, who had been waiting her whole quiet career for somebody to need local history, pulled every box. The census records, the church registers going back to 1924, the funeral home ledgers, which the Historical Society had photographed years ago and nobody had ever once asked to see. It took 2 days. Marguerite found it on the second afternoon. A funeral home record from 1962. Adeline Voss services arranged and paid by the county. No next of kin located. And below it in a clerk's faded hand a note. Only living relative. A cousin deceased 1949. No issue. No issue. The cousin Gregory Hale claimed to descend from had died with no children. 13 years before Adeline. The whole branch dead and gone. There's no Voss left, Marguerite said. There never was. He made it up. He made up a family, Edmund said, to steal a dead woman's house. But it was Jesse who found the thread that pulled the whole thing apart. Jesse, who'd been studying for his GED at his grandmother's kitchen table every night learning to read documents the careful way Edmund had taught him to read a beam. Jesse, who looked at the development firm's name on the lawsuit and then at the name on the old business card and said quiet, Mr. Hollis, these are the same company. They were. Gregory Hale's lawsuit was funded by the same development firm that had come sniffing around the bank 3 years ago. The same firm. And when Edmund called Dunmore at the bank and asked him to pull the visitor log from 3 years back, the manager called him at home an hour later, his voice tight. "Mr. Hollis, the man who came in 3 years ago, claiming to be Voss family, the name I wrote on the card." A pause. "It wasn't Gregory Hale." "Then who was it?" Dunmore told him. And Edmund had to sit down, because the man who'd first come asking about the trust, 3 years ago, before the article, before any of it, the man who'd planted the seed and brought the developer and started this whole thing rolling, had used a fake name, but he'd paid the bank's notary fee that day with a credit card, and the bank had kept the receipt, and the name on the receipt was Roland Hollis. The room tilted. Marguerite sat down hard. 3 years ago, before he ever sold their house, before he ever taped that sign to the window, Roland had been in Merrow Creek, asking about a condemned Victorian in a 66-year-old trust. He'd found out about the money years ago. He'd been working an angle on it the whole time. And when his own parents stumbled into the very house by accident, when they bought it for $12 and Edmund cracked open that wall, Roland hadn't come to help. He'd hired a man to claim a fake family, to take it. "He knew," Marguerite whispered. "When he sold our house, he already knew about this one. He sent us east toward nothing, and we drove straight into the thing he was trying to steal." "And it almost worked," Edmund said. "Almost. Because a newspaper obituary that said, 'Survived by no one,' had told the truth. Because a county clerk in 1962 had written no issue in a ledger nobody ever read. Because a boy who'd left school but learned to read a document carefully had matched two names. And because a dead woman 66 years ago had been clear enough and careful enough to write terms no lawyer could break. The case collapsed in a single afternoon hearing. Gregory Hale's lawyer withdrew the moment the funeral records and the bank's receipt landed on the judge's desk. The development firm walked away from a fight it couldn't win and didn't want photographed. And Roland's name was never spoken aloud in that courtroom, which was its own kind of mercy and its own kind of sentence. Marguerite never filed a complaint against her son. "Why?" Jessie asked her gentle on the porch that evening. "Because the law already knows what he is," she said. "And so do I. There's nothing a courtroom could add to that." They named it the Voss Hollis Music Foundation. Edmund had wanted Adeline and Hazel only. Marguerite said no. Adeline wanted someone to carry it forward. "That's us now. Our name goes on it too." The bank manager helped set up the nonprofit funded by the trust. The university professor who'd come to see the compositions and stayed all day in cotton gloves reading Adeline's letter 3 times connected them with a lawyer who filed the paperwork for free. The county granted a historic preservation designation, a brass plaque for the front gate, a small annual tax break. The professor came back twice more. The third time she brought a proposal. "The adaptive method Hazel invented in that room," she said, "has no precedent in the literature before the 1970s. None that I can find." She wasn't just composing, she was inventing a way of teaching that the rest of the world wouldn't arrive at for another 20 years. She paused. "The university wants to publish all 43 pieces, a scholarly edition, with your annotations, Marguerite, about how the fingerings actually work in a teaching room." Marguerite looked at the archival sleeves stacked on the table. 43 pieces, 3 years of a 19-year-old's work, written with a ruined hand, for people she would never meet. "Do it," she said. "All of it." Jessie finished the porch railing on a Friday in April, the last of the exterior work. He stood on the sidewalk with Edmund and they looked at it together. White paint, green trim, every line plumb, every joint tight. "You built that," Edmund said. "You taught me how. I taught you to hold a level. You figured out the rest." Jessie took off his cap, put it back on. The thing he did when he was working up to something. "Mr. Hollis, I want to go to college, structural engineering." "All right." I don't have a diploma. I don't have money. My grandmother can't. You start with the GED. The county has a program, 3 months. I checked. Edmund didn't look at him. Then you apply to the state university. They've got a structural program and scholarships for kids from this county. I'll write the recommendation. Jesse stared at him. You already looked into all this. I looked into it your second week here. Edmund finally turned. You're good at this, Jesse. You see how things fit together. That's not something I taught you. That's something you have. Jesse didn't say anything for a while. He put the cap on, took it off again. Thank you. Don't thank me. Go get the GED. His grandmother walked over that Sunday, slow, careful, her oxygen line trailing. She sat on the new porch for an hour and listened to Marguerite play through the open third-floor windows. When she left, she took Edmund's hand in both of hers. He talks about you every night at dinner, she said. Says you're the first person who ever showed him what he could do. He did the work, Edmund said. The phone call came on a Tuesday. Marguerite was washing cups after a lesson. Her cell buzzed on the counter. An unfamiliar number, a familiar area code. She dried her hands and answered. Mom. She knew the voice at once. Curtis, the middle son, the one who'd changed his number, the one who'd texted them about senior communities and then gone silent for 5 months. I know who it is, she said. A long pause, she could hear him breathing. I saw the article about the house, about what you found. Your father and I, yes. Mom, I'm sorry. I know it's not enough. I know saying it doesn't fix anything. But I'm sorry. Another pause longer. I should have called the day Roland told me what he'd done. I should have driven over and picked you up and told him he was wrong. I didn't. And I've been sitting with that every single day since. Why didn't you? Because it was easier not to. Because Roland handled everything, and I let him. And by the time I understood what had happened, it felt too late to say anything. Marguerite looked out the window. Edmund was in the side yard stacking scrap lumber into a neat pile for a neighbor who burned it, picking up a board, turning it over, deciding if it was worth keeping. Can I come see it? Curtis asked. I don't need to stay. I just want to see what you built. I want to hear you play. She watched Edmund set one board on the pile and reach for the next. It's always been your house too, she said. Mom, come Saturday, bring nothing, just yourself. She hung up. She stood in the kitchen a while. She didn't cry. She'd done enough of that already in this house. She put the phone in her pocket, dried the last cup, and went upstairs to play. The spring recital was held on the first Saturday in May. 40 folding chairs borrowed from the church set up in the parlor. Everyone filled, and a dozen more people standing along the walls and out into the foyer. Jesse's grandmother in the front row with her oxygen tank beside her. Verna next to her. The plumber. The electrician. The neighbor who'd left the tomatoes. The librarian who came with a framed copy of the 1951 clipping and pressed it into Marguerite's hands before they began. And in the back row in a chair he'd carried in himself, a man in his late 40s who'd driven 2 hours that morning and brought nothing but himself. Curtis. The students played one by one. The 9-year-old went first, a piece called Morning Walk, slow and careful, both hands flat. The farmer played one called What the Hands Remember, and his stiff fingers found every note. And Sarah, the girl with the scarred hand, played for Hands, that remember the same piece Marguerite had sight-read the day they broke through the wall, and she played it clean and strong and without one moment of hesitation. When she finished, the room was quiet. Not polite quiet, real quiet. The kind that means something has happened. Marguerite played last. She had chosen Hazel's most complex piece, Letter to Someone I Haven't Met, written in the girl's final months, demanding real musicianship, real depth, and exactly the kind of adapted hand positions that made it possible for a woman of 71 with stiffened hands to play it. She'd been working on it for weeks. She sat at the Steinway. She placed her hands on the keys. And before she began, she did something she hadn't planned. She reached down and lifted the lid of the bench beside her. The old oak bench. The one she'd found that first night alone on the floor with no piano. She'd kept it, moved it up here, and she lifted the lid now in front of everyone because something had been nagging at her for weeks. The cloth at the bottom had never quite lain flat. She pulled the yellowed cloth aside, and underneath it, pressed flat against the wood, was a single sheet of staff paper. The room held its breath. Marguerite drew it out with shaking hands. Ink faded to brown, a title across the top in a hand they all knew now. Hazel's hand. But this piece had no ending. The final bars trailed off mid-phrase. The last note was a quarter note with no resolution after it, just empty staff lines running off the edge of the page where a girl had been composing on a Monday and was gone by Friday. And below the title, a dedication, the only one Hazel had ever written on any of the 43. For anyone who was ever told they would not play again. Marguerite read it out loud. Her voice did not break, though everyone in that room was waiting for it to. Then she set the unfinished page on the music stand beside the finished one, and she played them both. She played Letter to Someone I Haven't Met all the way through, and then she turned to the unfinished piece, and she played it to the place where Hazel had stopped, and then she kept going. Because a teacher knows how a phrase wants to resolve. Because 66 years later, a woman whose hands the music had been written for finished the sentence a 19-year-old girl never got to. Not perfectly, not the way Hazel would have, but honestly, in Hazel's own language with Hazel's own wide fingerings, the way you answer a letter from someone you never met but somehow always knew. When she lifted her hands, nobody clapped right away. Then Verna started, and the room followed. And the sound rose up through the house, up the narrow stairs to the third floor, where the door to the sealed room stood open, and the afternoon light came clean through windows that had been blind for 60 years. People stayed after. They ate Verna's pie and drank coffee from the church percolator. They walked through the house and looked at the photographs on the walls, Adeline and Hazel and the Victorian in its first glory. They read Adeline's letter in its frame in the waiting room, and more than one of them stood there a long time. Curtis found his mother in the kitchen. He didn't make a speech, he just stood in the doorway the way he had as a boy when he wanted to come in but wasn't sure he was allowed. "It was beautiful," he said. "Thank you for coming. Can I come back?" Marguerite looked at her son, 48 years old, and asking permission to know his own mother again. "The door's open," she said. "It's always been open. Some people just take longer to walk through it." Roland never came back. He never called. But 2 weeks after the hearing, a check arrived in the mail. Plain white envelope. No note, no return address. The amount was large. The memo line blank. Edmund recognized the handwriting on the envelope. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at it a long time. He didn't cash it. He didn't tell Marguerite. He carried it upstairs and lifted the lid of the piano bench and laid it inside next to the yellow cloth where Hazel's last song had waited 60 years. Some things aren't forgiveness, and they aren't a bill paid either. Some things are just left in a quiet place, waiting to be understood, by the person who sent them, or by the person who kept them, or by nobody at all. He closed the lid. Late that evening, after the chairs were stacked and the dishes done and the house was quiet, a boy of about 12 came out the front door. Somebody's grandson dragged along to the recital and bored out of his mind. He stopped on the sidewalk and looked up at the house. The tower. The third-floor windows where the curtains moved in the breeze. "My mom says this used to be the haunted house," the boy said to no one in particular. Edmund was on the porch step. He could hear Marguerite inside talking to someone, her voice warm and easy. He could hear underneath it the sound of one student lingering at the upright, running a scale she didn't want to stop running. "It's not haunted," Edmund said. The boy looked at him. "It was just waiting." The boy shrugged and ran off down the sidewalk to find his mother. Upstairs, the third-floor windows were open, and Hazel's music drifted out over Linden Street, the way Verna's mother always swore it used to back when a girl played with the windows open on summer evenings and the whole town would stop on the sidewalk just to listen. It was just a house, a real house. Good bones, an open door, and music coming through the windows. And the music had never really stopped. It had only been waiting 60 years for the right hands to come and find it.